and this boundary is not perfect. It's not a rock wall. In my head. Hello everybody. So it snowed yesterday, and that means the holidays are here, and I thought what a better time than to talk about mental health and boundaries, because my boundaries have been tested. I don't know about yours, but here in America, holidays are like a big deal. There's a lot of cultural norms that we have to follow, or we're supposed to follow. And so boundaries get really complicated. We have to see people that we don't really want to see necessarily. We have to do things we don't necessarily want to do. So let's talk about what that looks like. Okay, so the first thing that I want to say about boundaries is that when we have been abused in childhood or neglected, our emotional needs especially neglected, then there's a good chance that we don't know what boundaries are. And that's because boundaries and emotions are tied together. So let's take a second here and clarify exactly what boundaries are for the people that don't know, because it's not something that we were like taught in school. I don't know, my parents never sat me down and talked about what boundaries are. I do remember there was like a class when I was in kindergarten, I think, that was like about this is good touch and this is bad touch, but boundaries go way beyond that. So the first thing that we need to define when we're talking about boundaries is, what are you? Like, what's you? Like, we know our physical body is us. We all kind of intuitively get like that our skin, our internal organs, all of this is us. But there's more to us than just this. So we also have our minds, and our minds are part of our physical body. We probably don't think of it that way, but our brain and our neurological system is an important part of our mind. And we also have our emotions, which we sometimes think of as our heart, but it's not that the heart organ contains our emotions. Again, it's all the brain and the neurology and the way that our five senses, on our skin, our eyes, our ears, our mouth, that's all a part of who we are. And we even go further beyond that. We also have the space around us, which we usually call our personal space. But personal space is a little bit different for everyone. Personal space is a little bit different for everybody because everybody has different experiences in their lives. For example, some people who have had experiences where they were raped, they have been touched inappropriately. And so maybe just being close to somebody is a little bit too much. Like, if I came up to you this close, wouldn't you be a little bit uncomfortable? Probably. But everybody's a little different because different cultures have different levels of personal space. Some cultures, it's okay to be up in somebody's face. That's like a normal talking distance. Other people, other cultures, it may be more appropriate to be further back. But then people in general, like each person has their own personal space where they feel most comfortable. And then we should also take into account that different types of relationships require different types of personal space. If I just met you, it wouldn't be appropriate to be this close to you. But if I was in a deep, meaningful relationship with you and I've gotten to know you over time, it might be appropriate to be that close to you because we may want to be close. So basically, there's no perfect way to define where you end and something else begins. And that's because it's going to change depending on relationship, situation, culture, time in your life, past experiences that you've had. Everybody's a little bit different. But let's talk about what's not you for a second, because sometimes we need to clarify that as well. Some of us haven't had the time in our lives or the calmness, the stillness to be able to look outside and see, like, okay, that's not me. I mean, obviously, just like looking around at the surroundings, that's not me. I know some people might feel like it is. Maybe you feel narcissistic, you feel grandiose, and you feel like you're in control of everything. And maybe you do believe like that is all in your control. That's not in your control, believe me. You can't control the weather. You can't control like the people around you. So it's important to know that that's not you. Specifically, when we're talking about people, it's important to recognize that other people are not us. The boundary that we're trying to define here is between us and the outside world. And we can't control things like the weather. We can't control people. And if people come at us with emotions, those emotions are also not us. But this is where things get tricky, because other people's emotions can affect us because we are biologically wired for that. We are social animals, we're mammals, and we have a neurology, a brain system that encompasses emotions, and emotions are communicating. They're a way to communicate with other people, and through history we've used this means of communication to survive. And because we use it to survive, that means it's deeply wired in us. So I know you may be one of those people who thinks like, oh, emotions, like vulnerability, it's disgusting, I hate it, I'm not vulnerable, F that S. But you have emotions, whether you recognize them or not, whether you're suppressing them, repressing them, denying them, they're still inside of you. You have the neurology. It's there, whether you're using it or not. And I should actually clarify, you're always using it. Your body just naturally uses it. Your emotions are not something that's fully in your control. If somebody stabs you, you're gonna get either angry or upset. Like, your body reacts to things. That's how our bodies are built. So it's important to understand, though, we may not be able to control what's outside of us, and there is a boundary between us and other things. It's a boundary that can be penetrated, and this boundary is not perfect. It's not a rock wall. No matter how much we may try to make it a rock wall, it's not possible to do that. Just to swing back in the other direction again, boundaries also do exist. There is a separation between you and other people, and we can see that most clearly in our skin. But it's important to understand, as I said, we can't control other people, and we are not at the whim of what everybody else does. We do have power to stop other people and their emotions from completely taking over our lives. Now let's take a moment to talk about emotions, because your emotions, I think we've established this by now, that they exist. They're a neurological function in your body. It's not something that you can eliminate. It's not something that you have to be at the whim and mercy of. You can interface with your emotions and you can have some control. So if you want to have healthy boundaries, and I should explain, we want healthy boundaries so that we don't get overwhelmed by the world and that we can have intimate relationships with people. Healthy boundaries are so important to living a healthy and happy life. But if you want healthy boundaries, you got to recognize those emotions. You have to pay attention. You can't always, I find a lot of people that have trouble with emotions, they're always angry, like that's the one emotion, or they're always sad, or in some extreme cases, some people are always happy. It's really kind of like a front. They're not actually happy all the time. And you need to be able to experience and communicate all of those emotions if you want to have healthy boundaries in relationships. And the way that we feel our emotions is exactly what it sounds like. We feel them through our senses, our five senses, our sight, our hearing, our smell, our taste, our sense of touch. All of that is linked up with our neurological system, and the feedback from that is how we experience our emotions. Now, here is the really important thing about emotions and boundaries, is we need to communicate them. If we don't communicate them, other people don't know where our boundary is. And if we don't listen when other people tell us how they're feeling, we also don't know where somebody's boundary is, and we won't have healthy relationships. So even though it's hard, if somebody is yelling at us, if they're angry at us, we have to tell them, when you talk to me this way, this is how I feel. And let them know, like, what is it that they're doing that triggers this emotional boundary in you? Because these are experiences that we have, and if we're not communicating them, we live with them alone. We feel pain all alone. We may internalize what's coming from outside of us and start to beat up on ourselves. We may externalize what we're feeling inside out onto other people later, and the boundary between us and other people becomes like more porous and more thin. So the boundary has to be communicated, and it has to be communicated well, so that the people around you know how to treat you. Now, I know that a lot of people on social media, they'll just like block somebody, for example, and that would be like an example of a really hard boundary. And that's appropriate when it's like a stranger, you don't really know them that well, or they're doing something like harassment. It may be appropriate to block somebody, but that's a very harsh boundary. And if you do so, and you don't communicate to them why you're doing it, it's a problem. It's a problem because they're not getting the feedback. They're going to continue doing what they're doing, and you're robbing yourself of the opportunity to express yourself and to be heard. But again, I get it. There are appropriate times when a hard boundary should be put in place. If somebody's attacking you, if somebody is harassing you, stalking you, all forms of abuse, it may be appropriate to put down a hard boundary and say, enough is enough, I'm not doing this right now. And you don't actually owe somebody the communication of your own feelings and emotions. That's not something you have to do. But if you want to have healthy relationships, it should be the general way that you talk with people. At the other end of this, we often see people who they just agree to everything that everybody says to them. If somebody wants you to do something, you just say yes because you feel like, well, who am I to say no, and I have to do what they say if I want them to like me, that kind of a thing. That's also a problem. It's not okay to not communicate your emotions. It's not okay to not say no. Now, people will misuse boundaries, or they'll say they're using boundaries, but they're not really. For example, when you set a boundary, you're typically also adding a consequence along with it, as in, if you keep talking to me this way, then I'm going to go out of the house and take a walk. That's a consequence. Some people will think that if you keep talking to me this way, I'm going to smack you upside the head is a consequence. No, that's abusive. That is not an appropriate boundary. So that would be an example of a hard boundary, which is inappropriate. It cuts off intimacy. It cuts off being able to interact with somebody, and it's a way of trying to control a situation to make ourselves feel better about the emotions that we're feeling. It's an inappropriate way of regulating our emotions. On the opposite end, some people will agree to everything and do everything everybody else says, but then when it comes down to it, they become resentful of other people. They get angry at other people, and they feel like, well, I do everything for you and you don't do anything for me. And again, that's that loose boundary, and that loose boundary is also a problem, and that's also abusive. Okay, clearly it's getting dark out here. I need to wrap up. So if you want to see more mental health videos, head on over to my channel, youtube.com/RyanLiberty, and subscribe. And I just put out my 300th video, which I spent about a month on. I am very proud of it. So if you haven't seen it, go check that out. That video is called This Is Trauma. Now I want to say thank you to all of my patrons who help make videos like this possible. If you want to become a patron and support me on my mission of humanizing mental health, I'll put that link down below. Finally, I would like to know, did you learn anything from this conversation? Do you have anything to add? Did I miss something? Maybe you take issue with something I said? Let's talk about that down below in the comments. I do want to foster a community of people who care about mental health here. As always, thank you for being around with me and discussing these things. I'll see you around next time, everyone.